What influence do spouses have on their other half's political success? Let's talk to Shehab Khan, news reporter and columnist for The Independent, and also joining us from Westminster, Laura Perrins, co-editor at The Conservative Woman. A very good afternoon to both of you. Shehab, let's start with you. Why did the Mays do it, do you think?
I think it was an attempt to make Theresa May seem more relatable. Throughout this campaign period, there have been criticisms that Theresa May comes across as quite distant. She doesn't really engage with members of the public, and people have found it quite difficult to associate themselves with Theresa May. I think the point of her interview yesterday was to show that she is quite normal. The conversations that we heard were things like who puts the bins out, conversations they have at home, why they go on holiday, where they go on holiday. And I think the point of it was so that members of the public could see a slightly softer side to Theresa May and relate to her more than they have done in the past.
Laura, do you think we, as members of the public, as potential voters, have a right to know who our ultimate elected leader is with? What does it tell us about them, and how does it inform our view of them?
Well, I think what the interview showed is that Theresa May is a very safe pair of hands, and your average voter isn't interested in having, a big personality. They want somebody who's a safe set of hands who can run the country, and I think that came across in the interview. They're obviously Theresa May and Philip May are very supportive of each other. They've been married for 37 years, which is an incredibly long period of time, and they're a very dignified, decent couple, and I think people will be reassured by that.
The reality she had on one level is that you talk about normalising our impression of her. The truth is, to become Prime Minister, that requires a degree of abnormality, doesn't it? The choices you make, the work you put in. This is a very solitary role. Maybe abnormal is not quite the right word, but a solitary role for sure.
Yeah, well, and that's why Philip May was...
Go on, Shehab.
That's why Philip May was asked whether or not there are times where he has to put his foot down and say that she can't bring work home with her. I think what we need to understand is members of the public are looking for a Prime Minister and a leader that represents them. And what we saw from David Cameron when he was Prime Minister was a young man who'd become Prime Minister with a young wife and a young family. And I think a lot of people found that they could relate to him because he was able to portray himself as a family man. Irrespective of whether it takes an abnormal human being to reach the top of politics, what people want is someone that A, can represent them, and B, understands the struggles and difficulties that they have in modern-day society.
Laura, can we just talk about the principle of the thing, about to what extent it's right that we should know who our Prime Minister spends their off-camera hours with? I mean, if you meet somebody who, and you're interviewing them for the role of prospective friend, you can form an opinion about them from what you see, from what you hear, what you talk about, etc. But actually, sometimes it's only when you double-check, cross-reference who they're married to, who they're with, that you get a fuller picture. So it's quite useful.
Yeah, I mean, it is useful for the electorate, and I think the electorate are incredibly happy with Theresa May, and they do see her as a steady ship, as opposed to the other side, the Labour Party, who are essentially a group of Marxists, particularly John McDonnell, who's the type of person who would stand on top of millions of bodies and say we only need a few more for utopia to happen. I mean, the decision is not a difficult one. You've got an incredibly safe pair of hands in the form of Theresa May, who has dedicated her life to public service, and on the other hand, a bunch of Marxists. So, of course, I mean, she can bring on her husband, and it just reinforces the fact that this is a dignified, decent individual who is very driven. And of course, you have to be driven to be Prime Minister. She's dedicated her life to public service, and it's certainly in the best interest of Britain that she leads us through the Brexit process.
OK, we're veering slightly off the subject here, and I want to bring us back to it, Shehab, and reflect on the fact that, there is a choice, isn't there? I mean, you can look at Prime Ministers. Norma Major was very much in the background. You can look across to examples of Prime Ministers or indeed presidents. You think of Michelle Obama, who've been real front and centre. I know it's a different role, that whole idea of First Lady. But you think back as far back as someone like Ted Heath, and there were some people who never quite were able to feel that all was well for somebody who was unmarried in the 1970s, very private person. Could you do a Ted Heath today?
I think it would be extremely difficult. And if we look at politics sort of across the globe, politicians now come across as family-orientated people. It would be extremely difficult to replicate what Ted Heath did and sort of stand as a single man. Jeremy Corbyn is actually trying to do that. He's made it very clear that his family are completely off limits when it comes to the general election. His wife has taken a back seat. She's not appeared on the campaign stage. She's made no attempt whatsoever to influence his politics from what we hear. He's been invited to go on the One Show. We understand that if he is going to attend, he's going to attend alone. He is trying to do that. I think that's a very difficult thing to do, and I think people want to know everything about you when you stand for a position like Prime Minister.
Laura, on the Ted Heath question, could it happen today?
I think it would be more difficult for that to happen today. I think it's a fine balance. I mean, the other issue is that, today is obviously so different to the 70s in that you do have a 24-hour news channel such as Sky and the BBC, and it is an insatiable beast that likes to be fed the whole time. So, I mean, the media... the media want these stories. Whether or not the electorate want it as much, I'm not too sure. But it certainly, it was one interview, but most of the election will be focused on the policies, and I think that's what we've seen so far. There will be other interviews, and as I said, the other leaders are, I think, due to give interviews on the One Show, and it's a relevant factor, but I don't think it's the deciding factor for the electorate.
Shehab, we sometimes ascribe motives to spouses, don't we? And you could argue, some would argue, it's done on a sort of gender basis. The Lady Macbeth figure, House of Cards in the background, pulling the strings. For all we know, you look at someone like Dennis Thatcher, who was, very much a stay and a support for Margaret Thatcher, but otherwise sort of stayed in the background. But for all we know, Philip May, highly educated, they've been together a long time, highly attuned political antennae. Maybe he's, the Lady or Lord Macbeth figure in this equation. We don't know, do we?
We will never know. But what we do know is that Theresa May has made it very clear that she does confide in her husband, and that at times when there are difficult decisions need to be made, as you would expect with anyone in the country, she turns to her partner to make these decisions. Tony Blair, when he was Prime Minister, made it very clear that Cherie Blair was the person that he would often speak to about making big decisions. David Cameron was the same. I think we'd expect that of any politician, of when they're in difficult periods, to go speak to their partner. I was speaking to a political advisor the other day who said the best advisors are the ones who are the first in the room and the last ones out. And when you're someone's partner, that is exactly what you're doing. You're there first thing in the morning, you're there late at night, and you're going to be the person that, when you're a leader, the leader is going to turn to make difficult decisions.
Laura, it can be a tough role, can't it, being the leader's spouse? Just look at the flack that's been directed towards Emmanuel Macron's wife recently, and people with, questioning the nature of their relationship. The age gap in particular has been the subject for particular scrutiny. And, you think of our own politicians. I remember covering the 2001 election, and Tony Blair made a point of walking down an aeroplane to thank me for an article I'd written about Cherie Blair being on the campaign trail and being a campaign asset for him. The point was, he'd been really stung on a personal level by some of the opprobrium that he felt she was unfairly getting in the press. It becomes a point of vulnerability which they don't necessarily want or need.
Well, I think it very much depends on how much the spouse and the political team behind them
You're on the point of saying Cherie Blair had it coming.
Well, they're your words. If you are going to really rely on your spouse, such as Bill Clinton did with Hillary Clinton, and that you're offering nearly a 2-to-1 deal and saying that they're really in the room here with me making the policy decisions, then you must expect both of those individuals then to be scrutinised. And I think that is what happened with the Blairs. That's clearly not what you're getting with May. She's saying, it's myself as Prime Minister and the rest of the Conservative MPs who are on the ballot. My husband is here to support me, as you would expect of any spouse, and no doubt she's supportive of him in return. As I said, you would expect nothing less in a 37-year marriage. But once you go over that line and you start making, making policies such as Hillary Clinton did with the health policy, then you bet you'll be subject to some severe scrutiny.
Yeah, Shehab, there is a democratic principle there, isn't there? It's not our country, but when we think about America, Hillary Clinton's, or better still, Michelle Obama's name was not on the ballot paper, was it? And yet she took on a very official set of functions.
Yes, she did. And when they stood on when Barack Obama stood on his platform, we knew exactly who his wife was, we knew what their relationship was like, and we knew what she stood for. We're not really getting the same from Theresa May, and you're right. Although we as a country deserve to know exactly the exact role that Philip May plays, we're not really going to find that out. He comes across as very shy. In the interview yesterday, it was quite clear that he's taken a sort of backwards role, but behind closed doors, the conversations they have is something that we'll never really know.
Shehab Khan, Laura Perrins, thanks both very much indeed.